everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. Today I'd like to talk to you about learned programming, and I'd like to answer the question a lot of you tend to ask me. Why is it that once you actually have completed transition, whatever that means for you, or you pretty much almost have completed transition, why is it sometimes in certain situations you tend to find yourself reverting back to the behavior that you used to engage in, maybe even social behavior you used to engage in before you started to transition? In other words, why is it that now that you have transitioned to the desired gender and you're being socialized and being immersed in the gender, why is it sometimes that you find yourself behaving like this old personified sense of gender itself? So for example, for anybody who identifies as a trans feminine, some of you sometimes ask me, why is it it's been years post-transition, it's been 5, 10, 20 years post-transition, and yet sometimes I find myself reverting back to old behavior. I find myself either responding from an inner sense of masculinity, or responding from what you used to, the words you actually used to use is responding as a guy, responding as a man I used to be. And the same goes for people who transition from the other gender, or even people who are non-binary tend to comment and they say, why is it I tend to revert to some of the behavior that I don't even identify with? And this behavior tends to be very gender specific, but nonetheless, you don't really identify with it, but yet you find yourself reverting to it. So I'd like to answer to you why that tends to happen, and I'd like to tell you some of the categories of individuals to whom tends to happen most often, and situations in which it's going to happen most often as well. So I call it learned programming. What is learned programming? Learned programming, simply put, is when our brains have learned particular way of behaving, and therefore it has programmed itself to think in a particular way. So imagine if your brain as if it is a computer, right? And a program prior to transition that it may have learned is how to behave, how to interact with the world through the gender lens of your assigned gender at birth. And as a result, you got so habituated, accustomed to it, that now you find yourself very difficult to strip yourself of that learned programming. Learned programming is something that tends to happen to our brains and tends to stay with us for a period of time until we find a new way of not really rethinking, but until we find a new way of rerouting those brain waves of looking at things from a more genuine, more authentic perspective. And that sometimes takes a while because our brains are like computers. And when things happen, we tend to revert to a particular behavior that is highly familiar to us. And as a result, that behavior is going to be whatever it is you learned for a period of time. So even though you may be interacting in your more authentic way, in a way that is more closely related to your now gender presentation, your brain is still yet to learn that. In other words, your brain is still yet to program it and make it into a program that can run on an automatic. Now, learned programming tends to happen to, the older you are, the more likely the learned program is going to stay with you for a longer period of times post-transition. That's again because the longer you have lived a life operating from that software, the harder it is going to be for you to relearn and to create a new learned program software. The younger you are, the easier it's going to be. So usually this is something that a lot of you who ask me this tend to be older, tend to be people who have transitioned later in life. And you find yourself now post-transition, it's been a year, 2, 5 years post-transition, you find yourself reverting to the behavior and you wonder, when is it ever going to go away? Well, it will go away, but it needs time. You need time to accumulate a new way of interacting with the world. And it has to be accumulated in such a way where it can outrun the programming that is in place. Because our brains are very automatic. Our brains are very habituated. So it is habituated in such a way where, unfortunately, even though you know you no longer relate to the old learned program, our brains don't exactly know that. Our brains are machines and they operate in a very quick ways. So when you do something or you interact in a particular way, our brain just does what it's habituated to do. And it often does whatever it is that is much more convenient or it's easier for it to do. And therefore, it reverts to learned programming. Learned programming, or reverting back to learned programming, also is going to happen to majority of you in the following situation. Situation number one is going to be situations that are very, very stressful. Any kind of stress, anything that gives you a lot of anxiety, anything that makes you really worried, any situation that you perceive as very, very high stress situations, you're going to revert to interacting with the situation and working through the situation from your older self. The reason being is because in a stressful situation, our brains reverts to what's familiar. And what's going to be familiar to your brain is your old sense of self. Your brain doesn't distinguish between authentic and authentic. That's us, that's your inner core that is able to distinguish it. But the brain in a stressful situation go to the same route that it knows and that's familiar. So when you're stressed, that might happen. Another situation when you may revert to the learned programming is around loved ones, around people who know you, around people who known you for a long period of time prior to transition. And you're going to revert sometimes because these are the people that in your brain you have also interacted from the learned programming space. As a result, your brain tells itself, oh, these are the people who've known me, these are the people who know me before transition. And so occasionally it's like a switch gonna go off and you're gonna revert to that behavior. Also, because you're around people that you care, and because you're around people that are familiar to you, your family members, your loved ones, and because they've known you before transition, you're gonna be much more hyper-vigilant and you're gonna be much more hyper-focused on it's almost like this unconscious hypervigilance of wanting them to see you and to validate your existence. And as a result, you're going to try and be very hyper-focused on your authentic gender. And that's puts your brain under stress. And when your brain is under stress, again, it's going to revert to what's familiar. So when you find yourself post-transition, whatever transition is for you, and if you find yourself in a situation where it's been years and you've been living already your life in your authentic gender and you already have a lot of personal experience, and yet you find yourself occasionally going, what the hell happened? Why did I just in this situation acted as my past self? I don't relate to that part of me anymore. Realize that it's learned programming that's happening, that your brain is just automatically reverting that. Ask yourself if you may be finding yourself in a stressful situation. And if not, just recognize that that's part of the process. To unlearn certain behaviors takes a while. Especially if some of the parts of the past behaviors were actually something that helped you, is something that is very adaptable, your brain will jump to that automatically because it's ultimately good for you. Your brain doesn't look at those things as gender, through gender lens. It's kind of genderless. So it's only doing what's best for you. And thinking that's what's best for you in the situation is to revert to that behavior because that's what's familiar to you. And perhaps right now you're so stressed about something else that your brain is telling you can't afford to be stressed about this, so let's bring in familiar. So actually your brain kind of works with you as an ally, even though it doesn't feel that way. So recognize it, and it's not an indication that you are it's not an indication that you made a mistake transitioning. That's another thing that people ask me. They ask me that, is that an indication that I'm still a man or I'm still a woman? No, it's not an indication of that. It's just an indication that your brain has yet to catch up to the new programming. That's it. That's all it is. So comment below. Let me know if you find yourself in this situation where you have those learned programming tendencies where you revert back to them. Share, tell me about the situations, and share with people in the comment section how you tend to deal with the situations. Looking forward to reading your comments, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.